Good morning, everyone. We start this second day and the first presentation and a topic on unaccompanied minors and the transition to adulthood. And I'm really happy to introduce my discussants. This is Ilse Derluyn. She's a professor at Ghent University and have been working extensively with the research topics such as migration governance, unaccompanied minors, health issues, and psychosociological well-being. So, and the second one is Isabela Atanasiu, Isabela, from the Migration and Home Affairs at the European Commission. And she's also have the experience with working on unaccompanied minors. And myself, Hilde Lidén, I'm from the Institute of Social Research. And have been responsible for one of the thematic projects on VULNER, on age and aging and vulnerability. Young children, and particularly unaccompanied minors, are considered to be among the most vulnerable protection seekers and are given adjusted reception conditions and rights to education and health treatment within the limits of the country's migration challenges and control interests. Although the minors are granted protection in most European countries, the logic underlying the legal status differs. In my thematic part study on the VULNER project, I have compared the situation of the unaccompanied minors in 4 European countries: Belgium, Germany, Italy, and Norway, based on the data from these national VULNER teams. The temporary stay as a child, referring to the vulnerability in related to age, or treated mainly as an asylum seekers, has implication for the type of reception conditions unaccompanied minors get access to, as well as how they are included in the asylum procedure. As we will see, this is also of vital importance for their legal status and living conditions when turning 18. Then there is a need for better understanding the consequences of being treated either as a child or a refugee when it comes to securing their civil rights, their current well-being, how migratory vulnerabilities are assessed and met, and their options for protection in a longer run. To illustrate the implication of age, I will start with a case from Norway. The story of Hamid, who was one of the unaccompanied minors whom I interviewed for the VULNER project, is informative on how regulation and praxis shape and produce various forms of vulnerability by reducing the young person's option to act upon their precarious situation before and when turning 18. Hamid arrived in Norway in early autumn 2015. In the arrival registration with the immigration police, he told he was 15 years old and belonged to the Hazara minority in Afghanistan. In his interview with me, He told that his father died when he was a small child and that his mother passed away when he was about 12 years old. He then stayed in his uncle's household for some months, having a difficult time with a heavy workload and no school. He spontaneously decided to travel to Iran. Here, he stayed for about 18 months, collecting plastic, and with his small saving, he traveled further west. After 5 months' hard work in a tailor's workshop in Istanbul, he afforded to go further, first to Greece, then walking north. It was a very difficult time. I experienced so many bad things on that journey, he tells. In the arriving procedure after reaching Norway, the immigration police assessed Hamid's age to be 18 or more, so he was transferred to a reception center for adults. The staff in the center considered him to be much younger than 18, with extra care needs. One of the staff members gave him special attention and by chance introduced him to the local Pentecost church, where Hamid found relief, a new faith. He felt safe and got new caring relations. After waiting for almost a year, Hamid had his asylum interview. He argued that he was a minor and an age assessment was performed. The age test concluded that he was most likely younger than 18, and he was then moved to the reception center for unaccompanied minors, was assigned a representative, and starting the local school. In the asylum decision, the immigration authority accepted the age he initially gave. Since he had already turned 17 before the asylum decision was made, and because they did not see any protection needs, he was granted a temporary permit until turning 18. Granting a non-renewal limited permit increased the stress and sleeping problems. He was expected to return to Afghanistan within a short time limit of some weeks after turning 18. Transition to adulthood then meant deportation. Since Hamid had his appeal pending in the appeal board, his deportation was put on hold, and after receiving a new rejection, he twice got help to have his case assessed in the appeal court, where his conversion to Christianity became the main issue. However, his conversion was not approved because they gave his case generally low credibility. In 2021, when the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, all deportation to Afghanistan stopped. Today, Hamid has lived about 4 years in a reception center for adults with a deportation pending, with no option for going to school and to work. In Hamid's case, if the police had accepted that he was 15 during the arrival consultation, he would most likely have been granted residence and by now ended his secondary school and started higher education, as was his hope and plan. He says, "But I had bad luck. I was born in a war zone. That was not my choice. I just wanted to go to school like every young person my age does. Why is this damaging for society? We are all human beings." The case sheds light on the lived experience of the regulation and practices producing vulnerabilities when already in a country where seeking protection and when turning 18. The 4 countries included in my study place themselves on a continuum of treating the unaccompanied minors either mainly as a child based on the logic on equal treatment of every child in its territory, or as an asylum seeker placed in separate tracks, inclined with the legislation and praxis of migration policy. When assessing the reception conditions, Germany can be placed in the one end of the continuum, mainstreaming the responsibility for all unaccompanied minors for the local youth service and welfare authorities. On the other hand, Italy, where the reception condition for all unaccompanied minors are part of the asylum system, they stay either in ordinary centers or as separated units run by NGOs on behalf of the local immigration authorities, as we was explained yesterday. Belgium and Norway have dual paths as a mean to balance expectation from both children's rights and control interests. In Norway, the division is solely based on age, including minors 14 years and younger into the child welfare system, while those 15 and older are included in the asylum system because it's cheaper and also they are more competent to challenge these hard situations as expected for that. Belgium has a separate durable solution track for minors expected not to have any protection needs. Mainstreaming reception condition is also given to those assessed to be the most vulnerable minors, the youngest, the girls, and those with additional health problems, and by this praxis acknowledge somehow the intersection of age and other vulnerable factors. When it comes to the protection status, the four countries place themselves somehow differently on the continuum. On the one hand, we find countries recognizing minors as vulnerable children, granting them temporary residence on the basis of their age solely, independent of their assessment of their protection needs. This is the case in Germany and Italy. The need to safeguard the minors' adequately access to accommodation and other basic provisions are often given priority. Therefore, the measures to ensure the minor with a representative and to initiate the asylum procedure for those with protection needs come later. A concern here may be that as time goes, it becomes more difficult to document their rights to refugee status, and maybe they are less possibility to have this recognized. Contrary, in Norway, all minors are treated as protection seekers and are immediately included in the asylum procedure, turning the outcome of the application into the main issue. When treated as a potential refugee undergoing a thorough asylum procedure with the intention to have a speedy and child-sensitive assessment of their protection needs, this may give a better option for clarifying their real legal status. For example, in Norway, where most unaccompanied minors come from conflict areas such as Eritrea, Syria, Afghanistan, a high percent, about 75 to 95%, receive permanent residence after a relative short period and long before they are turning 18. And the capability to secure the legal status already when being a minor is significant for their present and future feeling of safety. Then the Norwegian asylum system may be seen as an example of best practice concerning an adjusted asylum procedure for unaccompanied minors, including legislation, implementing children's rights, a dedicated administrative unit in charge of asylum interviews and decisions, and combined with guidelines specifying child-specific forms of prosecutions. Still, the asylum system faces limitations, as Hamid's case illustrates, due to age assessment, delays and compromises when chaotic times occurs, such as in 2015 and under the COVID period, to mention some. Turning 18 means that you now are seen as a young, capable person taking the full responsibility of your life, despite limited material resources, lacks of support and networks, as well as marks inflicted by harsh experiences due to your migratory childhood. In the VULNER project, I have studied the transition from one age category to another as implicit cultural and explicit legal conceptions of vulnerabilities, but even more crucial as lived experience. The most vulnerable categories of young people turning 18 are those with asylum decisions still pending and then being assessed as an adult when they get their decision. Those who have a temporary permit linked to their status as minor, and those with a final rejection and who face a forced return decision that will be enforced as soon as they reach 18. So turning 18 means that their rights as a child end, and it also have implications for moving and the access to school and other aspects of the everyday life. So my examination of the 4 countries give a somehow paradoxical picture of the implication of being treated as a minors versus refugee when turning 18. And we see that the legal status as a vulnerable minor makes the transition to adulthood more insecure for many. But I have this is some more aspects, but I haven't time to go into it now. However, in quite many European countries, the minors have an option for alternative tracks to be granted temporary stay. And I have mentioned, looked at in Germany, this is connected to continuing in education or in work. And in Italy, you also have the possibility when you are job seeking. So there are some options for that. In Norway, however, there are no option for alternative tracks when the case is closed, as for Hamid, and no option for finishing education and have work. So it is Norway is very generous for those inside and getting permission, but when they are decided not to be have this status, they are really wanted out. The flexibility given by such alternative tracks rise when combined with the option of aftercare And in Germany, this is run by the Youth Service, and Italy mainly by NGOs. So it's also different ways this may be an option, but it is also important that it is dependent on what kind of support you have to get these applications, and so it is not for all, and yeah, so it is conditional. To conclude, first, those treated mainly as a refugee may still have a safer transfer to adulthood than those with legal status as minors, receiving improved care, however, expiring when turning 18. Importantly, the potential in such better condition if treated mainly as a refugee is only there if unaccompanied minors are given priority in the asylum system. Two actual conditions and possible improvements are therefore to ensure sufficient systems of dedicated representatives and legal guardians to launch an asylum application documenting the minor's potential protection needs, and to ensure child-sensitive procedure and competent child-sensitive assessments of protection needs. And there is a need for a more holistic approach to the CRC rights and to addressing the intersection of risk factors. In most European countries, the political intention to address the vulnerabilities and ensuring unaccompanied minors adjusted standards is substantial. However, the lack of sufficient resources, as well as recurrent and enduring chaotic periods, turn good intentions and procedures into lax and disorder. And lastly, the migratory context matter. The 4 countries are situated differently due to migration on a scale from receiving a relative affordable number of asylum seekers, mainly from countries with substantial political conflicts, to countries receiving many more applicants with more mixed migratory backgrounds. And the analysis of the systems must also include this dimension. Thank you. And now I will give the floor to Ilse, and I think you will also present PowerPoint. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Hilde, for the very interesting presentation. Thank you also to the entire VULNER team. I think you have done a very wonderful job in not only bringing together very interesting findings, but also translating that to policy and practice. So thank you so much for that. I would like to build a bit further on the presentation of Hilde and looking at the experiences of this group that Hilde studied in different countries and the procedures related to that specific group, including also the status of vulnerability and how we deal with age and gender across these trajectories and in the resettlement phases based on the Child Move project, looking at the experiences of unaccompanied minors in a broader perspective of the entire European context. The Child Move project, which was funded by European Research Council, and I don't know if this is working, where we tried to document next to what we know about the experiences in the home countries and the impact on emotional well-being, what we also know to a certain extent, which was nicely presented also by Hilde, on the impact of the settlement experiences, what happens in the countries where these unaccompanied minors try to fit in, what happens in between, what happens in our European context on what kind of experiences do these minors have and how do these experiences impact their well-being. We started with a Child Move project to ask minors in 4 different countries to participate in our study. We worked in Libya in detention centers. We worked in Greece, both in detention centers as also in centers for unaccompanied minors. We worked in Italy in centers for victims of human trafficking, mainly Nigerian victims of trafficking, but also in centers for unaccompanied minors, also in, you could say, so-called informal settings under the bridge at the border between France and Italy. And we also worked in Belgium. So there's some overlap in the countries, which is nice in the context of this presentation. So we asked minors to take part in our study. We asked them to complete questionnaires on well-being, on experiences, and also interviewed them about past experiences, current situations, and their future perspectives. And then we tried to follow 3 out of the 4 groups, not the Libyan sample, throughout their trajectories while they were still moving in Europe. I think for this group, it's really important if you look at the trajectories, and these are the trajectories of our sample. If we look at these trajectories of unaccompanied minors, that we see that they have very complex and very long trajectories. So if you work with minors in Germany, in Norway, in Belgium, in Italy, at that time they already have a very long journey in which also they are treated in a very different way. Sometimes they are treated as a refugee, sometimes they are treated as a foreigner, so more not putting the emphasis on vulnerability. Sometimes they are more treated as a child, but that is a kind of continuum throughout their entire trajectory. So they have very long trajectories. Some do arrive in Europe and have the immediate idea, I want to go to the UK and I will proceed as fast as possible, and also kind of do succeed in that, although it might still take 6 months, 1 year. When they arrive in the UK, they have that path and they follow that path. Others, which is I think more prevalent in the population in Europe, have much more interrupted trajectories. They arrive in Italy, try to have documents, end up in the system, have a negative answer to their procedure, go further to Germany, try again in Germany, then an uncle says, maybe you should come to France. They move up to France. And so they have very interrupted, chaotic, and long-lasting trajectories. Trajectories impacted by documents and care structures. As you can see on the slide, upon my arrival, that's a quote of one of the participants, they promised to proceed with my documents, but they didn't keep their promise. The shower is once a week, food is not good, pocket money only every 2 weeks. So you have to accept the situation, you have no right to claim anything. But also family has a big impact on the decisions that minors take. Family advises to go to a certain country, but also the presence of certain familial networks in particular countries impact their decision where to go. Some decide to stay in a certain country at a certain moment, and then also try to create some social mobility through integration in that particular country. But all of them go through very difficult experiences in that journey, not only before arrival in Europe, but also, or even more, while traveling in Europe. Difficult events of detention, police violence, and violence at the borders. To read a quote on the slide, when we were in prison, a policeman came with smugglers. We were 5, 3 of us were women, 2 of them were pregnant. They beat and raped them all of them died, and only me with another man survived. They asked us to pay $2,000. When we told them we didn't have any money, they started beating us. Also sexual violence and sexual stigma. Once they see you're black, and if they hear that you're from Nigeria, it's even worse. They will beat you, rape you, shoot the boys, and nothing will happen. But also in the reception center. So our container has no door, no windows. In the night, drunk men are coming to the minor sections and they hit the containers with sticks to scare us. I'm always afraid to sleep. So in these stories, you clearly can see that how they are treated is often not being treated as a minor. So that aspect of legal status, having the right to protection, is not used or not done in these contexts. Especially at the borders, you see many stories of pushbacks. Even if they have documents stating that they are minors, they still are pushed back, also in the internal borders in the European Union. But also long waiting, long procedures, especially in Greece. The waiting was very long, waiting in terms of the Dublin procedure, so also specific aspect in that Dublin procedure to be reunified with a family member in another country in the framework of Dublin. Still, that took very, very long time. It took not only months, sometimes years. I'm very tired and stressed because I'm here for 2 years now and I still haven't got an interview. That's what I'm thinking about, and it makes me cry. Or another quote, I feel like I'm in a waiting room for the doctor, although I need to see the doctor every time it's my turn to somebody else is going in, and I'm just there waiting and waiting. So overall, we found that 85% of our minors had experienced physical violence themselves, 30% sexual violence, and 78% had been in detention. And we are talking here about a population that is unaccompanied minors. So 78% of those unaccompanied minors have been in detention, which of course we all know that should not happen for nobody, but surely not for unaccompanied minors. And of course these aspects have a strong impact also on the longer term on their mental health. I won't go too much in detail here, given the time, but just one quote on top. Every night I have bad dreams. I dream about my family. For me, it's difficult to go to bed and sleep. Still, I think, and that's the problem I have, this thing is in my mind. Luckily, there's also some aspects that help, and that clearly point also to the way that we build our reception structures here in Belgium, and also related to that, build out the procedure where Hilde also was referring to. Having something to do during the day, not being bored is a very important aspect. Having information, but also peer support, and in a broader sense, having a social network that you can rely on. Often we are thinking, and that also came strongly forward in the presentation of Hilde, we are thinking about formal support structure, we are thinking about guardians, we are thinking about psychological services, but often we see that next to those formal aspects, the informal social support structures are equally very important to deal with the many stresses that these minors have. And one of the researchers did a very nice study on documenting how social networks evolve over time. So what you see on the slide here is the story of one boy coming from Guinea. So he left home, that's on the bottom of the slide, in Guinea, and then went through all these different countries, and then you see how these different aspects of his social network evolved over time. So sometimes the contact with family was stronger, then it decreased again, then it went up again. Then volunteers came into the picture, volunteers that are often very important in people's trajectory. Migrant peers came up, and only then, later on in the story, you see that formal support also plays a role. But generally, that is also very clear in the PhD of Liesbeth Bakker, who will shortly being awarded a PhD. She's working at the VUB. We see that formal support has only a very small role in the whole story, so that the informal aspects are often much more important than the formal support. Minors deal in a very diverse way with these challenges. They try to avoid difficult thoughts, difficult feelings. They try to distract themselves. They try to rely on social support, but have a very selective reliance. They do not trust everyone, especially the former actors is very difficult to trust. And they some try also to have a positive look at the experiences they had and try to learn from them. So shortly to conclude on the Child Move project, we see that they have very interrupted trajectories with high levels of traumatic experiences in that entire journey, high levels of daily stressors also, which strongly impact their mental health problems that often last for long. So I think concluding on that, we see that even for that group, for unaccompanied minors, in that very complex phenomenon of migration, very complex in that sense that they have very long trajectories with very diverse experiences, we see that often they are not treated as a minor and they are not considered as being vulnerable. And at the same time, that label of unaccompanied minors also have very difficult impact. The longer, what Hilde was also nicely demonstrating, the moment that they leave that category because they are 18, they are age assessed as being older, for one or the other reason, they are not anymore in that category, they lose even more the protection and the specific provisions, although we see that mental health problems and the needs last for a very long time, even beyond that kind of border, you could say, of 18. So I think we really need to rethink that idea of limiting or attaching specific support measures to particular categories based on age and to a certain extent also gender. I leave it to this here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilse, for sharing this informative study and also to put into seeing the transnational aspects and the move and also this and the complexity of the social support and also the coping strategy. Oh, okay. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So it really informative, and I think this kind of research is really important to also to challenge the national methodology approaches that many of our research have as well. Then I will give the floor to you, Isabela, and please. You can sit there if you, or you can take the floor.
No, I can wait from here. Yes. Should I take the microphone? Okay. It's on. It is on. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Let me just first introduce myself very briefly. My name is Isabela Atanasiu. I'm a Romanian lawyer, and I have been working in the Directorate General of the European Commission on Migration and Home Affairs since 2015. I am based in the asylum system, and I am particularly in charge of following up on the protection of migrant children. So this is my specialty, if you like. I do not have a specific intervention or presentation to make today. The organizers kindly invited me by asking me to react a little bit to what has been presented this morning. And this is what I will do. So if my thoughts are a little bit scattered, please apologize, but I am going to have factual reactions to the things that have been presented and said this morning. I would like to start by just thanking the first two panelists for their presentations and for the kind of research that has been conducted. It is very useful from the point of view of the European institutions to have more in-depth analysis of these issues by comparing what happens in different countries in Europe, member states or associated countries. In 2020, the European Migration Network, which is a network of experts that is financed by the European Commission, carried out a study on the measures for supporting transition to adulthood for migrant children. The report is available online. I didn't bring the links with me, but I can share with the organizers for afterwards in case you are preparing a a sort of report of the conference proceedings, or you find it useful. But at any rate, just by Googling Yemen transition to adulthood, you will find it very easily online. In that report, basically the focus was on showing that different countries have a different approach to transition to adulthood. So, as you probably have been told, and you know, from the European perspectives, there is no obligation for our member states to provide support for transition to adulthood to the young migrants. This is a matter that is not regulated by European law, so it is therefore at the discretion of the member states. It's useful to clarify that there are two different topics that we are talking about, and we have talked this morning. So one of them was the treatment of the migrant children depending on whether they apply for asylum or not before they turn 18. And then what happens to them from the legal point of view, the legal status of the migrant, if you like, after having turned 18. And then a different topic is the one of supporting transition to adulthood. I think in my understanding of this concept, it is rather about the fact that young persons, when they turn 18, they do not become adults all of a sudden and independent. Like all of us, when we turned 18, we still needed support from our families and from our networks. Well, migrant children need the same, only that they are far away from their families. So one cannot expect that somebody becomes fully autonomous economically and psychologically, if you like, socially speaking, from one day to another once having turned 18. What we observe in practice is that turning 18 has a tremendous impact in many jurisdictions on the status of the children from the practical points of view, not only the legal status as a migrant. There are countries where the day when you turn 18, you are no longer entitled to be hosted in the facility where you were hosted as a child and taken care of by the child protection services. So from day one to another, you are in the street, literally speaking, and that means that you will have to fend for yourself, to look for a job, to continue your studies, see how, look for housing, which is a problem. As we know, the housing market in Europe is not very easy. It's not easy even for people who have jobs in many of the countries, let alone for those who are young and do not have financial guarantees. So the whole point was of the study that we have carried out with the European Migration Network was to see if countries have the willingness to sort of support this transition to adulthood of the migrant children by providing help to facilitate finding accommodation, finding jobs, continuing the studies, financial support, but also, if you like, the social, psychological support that was mentioned previously by my colleague. Now, it does not necessarily have to be formal. That was one of the points that was made, and indeed it's very important. One of the consequences of turning 18 is that in many member states, the legal representative or the guardian that was appointed to take care of the unaccompanied minor no longer has a mandate. So from that moment on, unless there is personal willingness on behalf of the person who was the guardian of the child to continue have a relationship, there is no legal way of facilitating it. And the guardian is in many countries, with the exception of Italy, but some parts of Germany as well, depending on whether the guardians are volunteer or professional. If the guardian is a professional guardian, then there will be no continuation of the payment of the stipend that the person was receiving in order to take care of the child. So this means that the continuation of the relationship is more or less left on a personal basis. This is why in many countries, civil society has stepped in and they have brought alternative solutions to this problem. And this is the kind of informal support that we see in countries such as Belgium, but also in Germany, also in Italy. I think all the countries under your study, where there are volunteer mentors for the young persons who are assisting them in the transition to adulthood. Sometimes not even with practical intervention. It's just a simple psychological fact of knowing that there is someone who is there present for you in case something happens. It's a tremendous help. Huh? I'm speaking from personal experience because I'm also mentoring some young persons here in Belgium. And indeed, I mean, they do not really ask a lot of you. They are just asking to know that there is somebody they can call for advice once every 6 months or something like this, or to know that there is somebody there. Contact with their own communities is fundamental. It is tremendous importance and collaboration of the society with these communities in order to facilitate the transition to adulthood of the young person is a very important and productive approach, I would say. But it doesn't have to be limited only to their own communities. Our own participation into this is a way of facilitating, building a community together, not to put it, you know, integration, inclusion, these kind of words. Now, what I wanted to say as well is turning back to the issue of the legal status, which is the more legalistic and more painful often subject. When it comes back to that, what I wanted to say is that in many European countries, children do not feel the need immediately to apply for a protection status, such as asylum or subsidiary protection, because national laws protect them until they are 18, no matter what. This is the case in Italy. It is certainly the case in France, but in many other countries as well. So people do not necessarily apply for asylum or for subsidiary protection, because if there is an alternative track which is feasible, they are going to pursue that because it's simpler many times. This is the case in Italy, where very few of the tens of thousands of unaccompanied minors that they are hosting are applying actually for asylum. And it is an interesting question to see why. I mean, why when people arrive to Italy, they do not apply for asylum there, the young persons? I think that we can observe two possible explanations. I mean, of course, each case is an individual one. We don't want to generalize, but there is, number one, the issue of them wanting to pursue their journey further. We have heard about this. I mean, very few people arrive there with the intention to stay in Italy. They have a project of moving somewhere else, and very frequently this is related to family considerations or to joining simply their community, their fellows from their same village or people that they already know somewhere else. So this reduces the incentive, if you like, to stay in the country where they first entered in the European Union. Then there is the issue of whether applying for asylum or not brings any sort of different treatment. In a country like Italy, where this does not really mean a qualitative improvement if you are an asylum applicant, because you are protected at any rate for the fact of being minor of age, there is little incentive from this part. But very often we forget that once you turn 18, there is no guarantee of your status afterwards. So in the case of Italy, if you have initiated an integration process, be it that you are on a working path, so you're training or you already found a job, you're training to integrate into a specific job, or you are going to pursue your education, you can prolong your stay, legal stay, after turning 18. This is the case in Italy. I suspect it is the same in Germany and probably in many other countries, but nota bene, not in all countries in Europe. So In some of the countries, still, it is not really self-evident that once you turn 18, you will find a path towards regularization unless you have applied for asylum. So this is sometimes a little bit of, how should I put it, an immense practical problem because, of course, I mean, many of these children do qualify for obtaining asylum or international protection. Sometimes they are not well advised by the people surrounding them to apply for this kind of protection, which gives a guarantee for the future. Sometimes they choose not to apply for different considerations, one of them being that they want to go to another country, so they don't want to be stuck with the procedures in one of the countries on the route. But nevertheless, for those of them who do not have a real chance of obtaining asylum, this is where the real problem comes, because under our rules in Europe, if you have no entitlement to protection and you are not going to be regularized by the member states under one entitlement or another, this means that you are basically a target for return or deportation. What happens is that in some countries, the decision to return the child to their country of origin is already taken when they are minors of age. But the actual execution of the order is suspended. Why? Because the European law offers very strict guarantees on this account, in the sense that you cannot return a child to the country of origin unless there are guarantees that indeed the conditions there are suitable, this is indeed in the best interest of the child. So to put it in practical terms, there are very high chances that the actual execution of a return order would be blocked by national courts if there is not sufficient proof that this is indeed in the best interest of the person. It's a very high threshold, but once you turn 18, that order was still pending, and these considerations disappear. There is no longer the guarantee that is surrounding you for the fact of being a child. And from this moment on, the execution of the return order is being triggered. And obviously, you can imagine the psychological toll that this takes on somebody who's 14, and they do know already that when they are going to turn 18, this is going to start, and that there is no realistic chance of finding a different solution. I think that this category, to my personal opinion, is the most vulnerable of all of them. We are very frequently focusing very much on the asylum seekers. Well, to the extent that their application is successful, these people are, among all these categories of migrant children, the most privileged one in the end, because they are the ones who are going to be the most protected. But the ones who do not have a chance to asylum and to regularization are, in my view, the most vulnerable and the most affected by the whole process that we are doing in Europe.
Thank you really for extending this complex situation of unaccompanied minors in really. And in a way, I think this focus on unaccompanied minors really feed into this discussion we had yesterday, Hathaway, raising this discussion on refugee versus vulnerability approaches. And I think this data on unaccompanied minors are really good to thinking on further on that issue. Yes. We are running out of time, unfortunately, but maybe we have one question, and then, yeah, thank you.
So, Winfried Kluth from Germany. Thank you very much for these interesting presentations and ideas. And I think the crucial point is especially what happens becoming an adult. And the case you mentioned, a 14 years old person where the return is not possible until he is adult, what can happen? And I think there in German law we have, within the last years, some possibilities, I call it bridges, that if you have within this time integration success, although education or a job, then you have the possibility of regularization, even if you are not accepted as a refugee. And I think this is, for example, with the Norwegian example, a very, very important perspective for those young people. And the European law does not give any obligation to do this, but this is, I think, a very important bridge to have a future perspective for those young people. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have to close this session, but we have to continue the discussion.